Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Welcome to the most significant day yet in teaser season for Dawn of the Hunt. Dawn of the Hunt is patch 0.2.0. It is a little bit smaller in scope than a lot of us were expecting, but it will have a number of significant things in it. Additionally, we do not yet have patch notes. Patch notes will be coming next week. This is a change from Grinding Gear Games' recent practice. They went through some of the reasons for this in a Q&A that took place after the main live stream that they did, and during that, one of the most significant things that came up was that they're doing a substantial balance pass through the game. Ultimately, I think a lot of this balance work should have been done in 0.1.1, but if it's not been done then, the best time for it after that is now. This is likely to include the gutting of Archmage, Hand of Wisdom in Action, and Trample Toe, which have been the three major outliers. Grinding Gear Games mentioned that their goal is that the first time you get to a Pinnacle boss, the fight should feel pretty impactful. And what was tending to happen was that with the best setups in Path of Exile 2's 0.1.0 days, you would get to the Pinnacle boss, and by the time you got there, if you were playing one of the strongest setups, you'd be able to kill it in a few seconds. Their goal is that the first time you get there, assuming you don't put off doing it for ages and ages, then depending upon how powerful your setup is, it'll be between 20 seconds and 3 minutes to kill that boss. That'll be the time to kill on that encounter. Then your character will be able to progress further past that, and you'll be able to get to the point that they'll start to feel trivial, but that will come later in progression than it did for people who are playing the strongest builds in 0.1.0. Some of the things that they've mentioned that they wanted to work on is making it so that plus gem levels has a reasonably equal effect across the board for skills. Currently, they isolated things like Spark, scaling far more with plus gem levels and other things, and at the same time, some skills scaled too little, such as most crossbow skills. Reading between the lines, I think what they're going for here is that Fireball's current scaling, that becomes the new standard. So skills get about as much power per gem level as Fireball does in 0.1.0, although we'll get the exact details of that when they put out the patch notes. On top of that, there are a number of other significant balance changes. Probably the highest impact one is aimed at people who are struggling a bit in maps, and this is that if you run a map that has less than 6 explicit modifiers on it, then if you die in that map, you will be able to re-enter a limited amount of times. The more explicit modifiers that are present on the map, the fewer times you'll be able to re-enter the map. So if you're running a map that is normal rarity, then you'll have 6 portals. If you're running a map that's got 4 mods on it, so just an alked map, then chances are you'll have 2 or 3. We don't know the exact numbers yet. And if you're running one that's got 6 maps or something that's corrupted to have more than 6, maybe as many as 10, then you're only going to get one shot at that map. Ultimately, the intention here is that you can balance risk and reward a little bit more, and players who are struggling to sustain maps at all because they're dying a lot, that they will find that they won't run out of maps as quickly. Of course, it is going to be the case that you probably shouldn't advance in maps if you're at the point that you're dying frequently. If you're dying very seldom, then that's fine, you can scale up. But if you're dying in every third map, then you should probably stay at the current map tier, and that's one of the things that they're going for. Essentially, the game is putting up a little bit of a warning sign, and that warning sign becomes a hard stop if you end up trying to push too far ahead of your character's current power level. Another significant balance change they're making is that Pinnacle bosses are going to be completely divorced from the XP system. You'll get no XP for running a Breach Stone, but at the same time, if you die in one, you will lose no XP. Most importantly here, learning Arbiter of Ash is going to be a lot easier because you're not going to feel, oh, I'm 27% into this level. If I go and try the Arbiter of Ash now and try and learn some of the mechanics of the fight, I'm just going to end up dying, and then I'm going to lose all my XP because I'll die multiple times. That's not going to be happening. You just simply won't lose XP. Of course, these changes will not have any impact if you opt in to the optional hardcore difficulty setting. Okay, so let's go through some of the major features in the expansion. The first thing to note is that there was some questioning as to the number of classes that would be coming and the number of ascendancies that would be coming. Well, we've got an answer now. We are getting 5 ascendancies and 1 class. This means we're going from 6 out of 12 classes to 7 out of 12, and from 12 out of 36 ascendancies to 17. What I think this means is that we can pretty confidently say Grinding Gear Games are not going to meet their aspirational target to have 1.0.0, i.e. the full launch of the game, in the 6 to 12 month time frame that they were working for. The 6 months was definitely out of the question already, but the 12-month end of it is also, I think we can say now, it's definitely slipped, and it looks like the full launch of Path of Exile 2 is going to be in 2026, and I also don't think it's going to be in the first quarter of that year either. It could be in the second quarter, the third quarter, or the fourth quarter. And I think we'll have more of a sense as we start seeing more classes added in. If the next major expansion has one class as well, then I think we're looking at quarter 4 release. If the next expansion has 2 classes, then quarter 2 and 3 are more on the table. So keep an eye on that as Path of Exile 2 develops. We're getting a new class though, the Huntress. The Huntress is going to be a spear specialist, and you'll see as we have a look some of the things that are available as skills for the Huntress, that there's a number of interesting mechanics that are tied to this. As well as being a spear user though, there'll be a number of elemental themed skills as well. The Huntress will have 2 Ascendancy options early on. The first one of these is the Ritualist. This is going to embrace the darker side of Azmeri traditions with ritualistic sacrifice. There is also going to be the Amazon as the other alternative, which is going to be more in line with the power fantasy you would expect from an Amazon. There are going to be 20 skills that launch for the Huntress, and these are going to include ones that are elemental in theme. And it's interesting to note that there's a combo shenanigans that's available with one of these that's going to be displayed shortly. Here you will see that there's this whirlwind, and then it's firing out a number of whirlwinds into the distance. The spear allows you to conjure a whirlwind where you stand with one of the skills, and then that firing off a tornado is a separate thing. Normally that would only fire off 1 tornado, but you see it's more like 8 here, and that's because of one of the combos that's available. If you're standing inside that whirling spear area, then you fire off that tornado, you're going to get a whole bunch of them instead. There's going to be a lot of those sorts of combos available for the Huntress, and it's going to be more of a goal, not so much that you use skill A with skill B, otherwise they just don't work at all. Instead, it's going to be, if you're using skill A, you will have a combo for skill B, you'll have a combo for skill C, you'll have a combo for skill D, and you can choose which ones of them you want to use. There's also going to be a counterattack mechanic, and one of the things they've done here, I think the thoughts that people often have with counterattacks is that it's a pretty weak playstyle because you're taking a hit and then you're counterattacking against the specific monster that hit you. The intention here is that these are all going to be AoEs. My thoughts here is that what you want to do is use the parry mechanic to try and essentially block or parry these attacks from the rare monster in the pack. And when that happens, when you get that proc, then fire off your counterattack, and that should delete the trash monsters in the pack. The rare monster probably survives, and then you can go on ahead and kill that rare monster with other things. Of course, if you're at a position where you're far into progression, you might be able to kill the rare monster with that one shot as well. There is also going to be a hit and run play style with the Amazon, where you're going to be able to dart in and out of an area, and that's going to then have a number of rewards where you can conjure whirlwinds at your feet when you're darting forward, all sorts of things along those sorts of lines. In terms of other classes, there are going to be 3 new Ascendancies. There is the Lich available for the Witch, and this is going to have a real theme towards chaos spells as well as curses. And there's also a couple of other Lich exclusive things, such as the concept of a phylactery. The Mercenary is going to gain the Tactician as a new Ascendancy, and the Warrior is gaining the Smith of Kitava. This one is really interesting. Partly in the canon of the game, Kitava's dead as of the end of the events of Path of Exile 1. So that's going to be interesting to see exactly how that happens, because Kitava's now been dead for 20 years in the world when you get to Path of Exile 2. But on top of that, there's going to be a number of really interesting mechanics for this. We'll have a look at that in a sec when we bring up the options that are available for that Ascendancy. There are a number of new skills that are being added. There is going to be Summon Rhoa, which is a new type of minion skill. It's called a Companion. The only difference with the Companion tag is that you can only have one of them compared to other minion skills. And additionally, the Rhoa is going to be something that sort of serves as a mount in a way. It doesn't increase your speed, but it decreases the amount that you're slowed down by casting all sorts of spells, or casting spells and making attacks while you're moving. That's the intention of what the Rhoa is going to do, and it looks like it's pretty solid. Fair warning though, if you're on it and you take a lot of damage, you're going to end up being heavy stunned, which is probably going to be a death sentence if you're in a dangerous area at the time. And Rhoa's Spectre is finally coming. What they're doing with Rhoa's Spectre is making it so that it has a variable spirit cost depending upon the target. So you'll see when we bring up the screen again that there is a Vargoliath that's 130 spirit, a Chaotic Zealot that's 50 spirit. So that creates an interesting opportunity cost scaling. Do you want to have a couple of really powerful Spectres, or do you want to have a large horde of weaker ones? They'll have the same mechanics of auto respawn, so it should be a much more fun playstyle than it is in Path of Exile 1, where having your spirits go splat is kind of unpleasant. But of course, who knows how it's going to interact with Detonate Dead. Detonate Dead is something that can be rather powerful in Path of Exile 1, in particular, it's like oppressively good in Path of Exile 1 sometimes, and we'll have to see now that both of those skills are in Path of Exile 2, exactly how they're going to end up working. There are going to be 100 new support gems. Some of these are extremely niche. For example, we have Rip and we have Tear. Both of these require you to inflict killing blows on enemies that were already bleeding in order to get any benefit from them, and Tear only amps up other on-kill effects that are caused by killing blows on bleeding enemies, whereas Rip creates a little bit of a reward for you. So there's a whole lot of things that are going on there. These are hyper niche supports, but at the same time, there's also some very general ones like Cadence. Cadence doesn't work on every attack build, but this supports attacks you use yourself, and the supported skills gain more attack speed each time you use them, but if you use them too many times in a certain period, then you'll hit a lockout point. The way this is going to work, supported skills are unusable for 10 seconds if you use them 8 times or more within 4 seconds, but at the same time, 10% more attack speed for each time they've been used recently. This is incredibly strong, especially if you can get to a situation where you're stably using your skills 6 or 7 times in every 4 seconds. So if you can get your skills to be 0.6 attack time while you're standing still and while you have the 60 or 70% more attack speed bonus, so that means you're looking at an attack speed that is slightly faster than 1 per second, then in that case, Cadence is going to be unbelievably good. It's going to be one of the best support gems in the game. But if you can't make that, then you can try and balance it around, try and make a number of attacks that don't cause you to go over this limit. And if you do go over this limit, then you'll need to have a fallback plan. So a really interesting support gem, not something that I think every player will find their favorite thing to use, but the power will definitely be there. I think the power on this is going to be so high that people will use it if they can make it fit in their build at all. But for people that don't like it, they can definitely use something else, because there are now enough support gems that you can just use something else. And then there's Loyalty, which is something that causes your companion to take bullets for you. 10% of damage you would take from hits are taken from your companion's life before you, but the minions from supported skills, i.e. from the companion skill, they have 30% less maximum life. So your minion becomes more fragile and also more willing to jump in the way of oncoming attacks. This is a really strong effect as well, but it's also something you'll have to be fairly careful about because it's not always going to work. There's going to be 100 new unique items. These vary from simple items that probably get out leveled at some point through to things that really stand out as new playstyle enablers like Mjolnir. This is something that exists in Path of Exile 1 as well, and it's being brought over with Grant Skill level 18 lightning spell on melee hit. Now, just like in Path of Exile 1, it has an oppressively high intelligence and strength requirement on this item, and in fact they're going to be more oppressive in Path of Exile 2 than they would be in Path of Exile 1, where it's a bit easier to get some of those attributes scaled up really high. However, if you can meet that, you're going to get a decent chunk of physical damage on this weapon, but you're also going to get +1 to the level of all lightning skills, and you're going to get this cool proc that's going to cause lightning spells to just go off at various points. So that's Mjolnir. Definitely seems like it's a strong item, and I feel like it's one of the items that might be intended as somewhat of a chase item out of this new expansion. That said, the coming Calamity, much more so when we get to that. Then there's also Zerfi Serape, which is a chess piece that doesn't have much in the way of generic stats, but it has Soul Eater on it. Soul Eater is an incredibly powerful effect that rare monsters can get, and this is something that causes when you kill an enemy, you'll gain a boost to your speed, like basically a large speed boost that will decay over time. Soul Eater is really, really strong, and I think that this is going to be one of the best chess pieces in the game for one particular niche, and that is fast mapping, not necessarily in the hardest of maps because it provides basically no defenses, but really, really fast blitzing of tier 15 and tier 16 maps. I think this is going to be really good for that, as long as those maps aren't juiced to the absolute limit. Or alternately, do juice them to the absolute limit if the rest of your character is providing enough power to get by. Then there's also unique charms that are being added. The Fall of the Axe is something that will provide you with a little bit of an extra speed boost when it procs, and of course it procs when you suffer a slow. So something that is thematically appropriate there, and be interesting to see what other charms exist. After that, there's a number of new encounters that are being added. Now, one of the things Grinding Gear Games outlined is that they feel like currently in maps, there's not enough interesting but different things that can just pop up randomly when you're mapping. So for that effect, they're adding Rogue Exiles to the game, and there'll be more on those in a sec, but they're also adding this new system of Azmeri Wisps. This is very similar to Path of Exile 1's Torment mechanic, but in my opinion, done well. The Tormented Spirit, if you like, is something that will follow along with you. It will empower monsters that it comes into contact with, but additionally, it's something that you can run away from if you want it to just end the encounter. If you run away from it, it will just detonate and there'll be nothing more in the way of it boosting up monsters. You can't attack the thing the way that you can with Tormented Spirits in Path of Exile 1, but it will possess rare monsters and unique monsters, and when it does, it'll give them a bunch of extra buffs and a bunch of extra rewards. Essentially, this is a risk versus reward mechanic, but it's something that will be a bit more predictable than Path of Exile 1's Tormented Spirits. When you encounter one of these, you can expect that the next 20-30 seconds of the map is going to be much more intense. And then if you also feel like it's getting overwhelming, then you can run away from it and end it. There are also going to be 7 new endgame maps. Now, my sense from this is that these appear to be all unique maps, and so unique maps are going to be substantially more common overall. Individual unique maps like Untainted Paradise should still be the same rarity, but there's just going to be more of them, and so they'll end up being more variety as a result. The Fractured Lake is going to be something that will remind players of Lake of Kalandra expansion from Path of Exile 1, and it's going to provide special crafting bases when you get to the end of it. But the feel of it is very much this bismuth type atmosphere that is going to be rising out of a lake as you move around it. The Ezomite Megaliths are going to be a boss encounter where you'll be fighting 10 bosses in a row, which will get incrementally more difficult. So that one could be potentially very, very, very rippy indeed. It'll be interesting to see how that feels. And there's a Silent Cave, which is only going to be found in desert areas. And in those desert biomes, it is going to be the Essence-themed encounter. Here, you'll be able to then go and juice up a map boss by giving it a bunch of essences. Potentially, you give it a small number. Potentially, you go overboard and give it too many, and you'll end up having a lot of trouble with it. And there will be more that are not yet being teased. I mentioned Rogue Exiles are coming. Rogue Exiles are going to be encounters against monsters that are more akin to a player than they are akin to just a trash monster. So they're going to be using their own gear, and when you kill them, that gear is going to drop. There's going to be a chance for those items to be things that could be quite rare and quite desirable, and of course, there'll also be a chance for them to just be normal magic items or normal rare items. The better that the items they have, the more power they're likely to get from them, and that's going to make it quite interesting. Again, the intention here is just that sometimes you'll be running a map and you'll encounter something you didn't expect, and it'll be both a boost in terms of difficulty, a boost in terms of excitement, and a boost in terms of rewards when you beat them. There's also going to be a couple of unique strongboxes. These seem to be less exciting than the others, but we'll have to see how they play out. There's Ichtal's Torment, there's also Ogham's Legacy are going to exist. One thing that they're changing with Endgame, there's actually quite a few things that are being changed with Endgame, but this one is probably going to be one of the highest impact ones. Corrupted areas that exist at Endgame. In 0.1.0, the corruption mechanic felt a little bit underdeveloped. It was basically +1 level and +1 mod to a number of areas, but it also was something that had a number of extra monsters that would spawn. They're going to go a little bit further into this. They're adding in some of the Beyond bosses from Path of Exile 1, and those are going to be found at the heart of these corrupted areas. Once you've defeated these corrupted areas, they will then change to cleansed areas. Cleansed areas will have different modifiers on them, and cleansed areas will have new monsters in them. Those new monsters will be able to drop new rewards, including the Fracturing Orb. Those of you that are Path of Exile 1 players will be familiar with this. Now, while this item does the same thing that it does in Path of Exile 1, it's actually going to play very differently, and that's because the Chaos Orb is so different between the two games. Essences are so different between the two games. With a Fracturing Orb, you can apply one of these to a rare item. As long as that item has at least 4 modifiers on it, one of those modifiers will be picked at random, and it will be locked. That locked modifier cannot be altered by further mechanics. So it's going to be stuck there. After that, you'll then be able to use Chaos Orbs and Annulment Orbs, and you'll know that you're not ever going to hit that particular mod. Where I think this is really, really, really going to shine is going to be on items that drop with 4 modifiers already, and they've got 3 that are really good, including one that's super premium. So for instance, imagine that you pick up a staff that has +7 to the level of all lightning skills, i.e. one of the best modifiers in the game. It's got a terrible second suffix on it. And then your prefixes, it's got 2 really good prefixes on it already. If your Fracturing Orb hits that +7 modifier, then you can use one of the omens that modify nulls to guarantee that you'll remove a suffix from the item, and then you are absolutely guaranteed to remove that undesired suffix from the item. And that's the sort of thing that Fracturing Orbs will be really good at. They won't get 6 mod perfect items, but they will help you get 4 and 5 mod extremely good items. Ultimately, I think that these are going to be very, very popular to use, but they will not work the same way they do in Path of Exile 1. Even though they do the same thing, their interaction with other currency is going to be very different. The other thing to keep in mind with Fracturing Orbs as well, they're going to be a bit more common than they are in POE 1. At least that's the vibe that I got from what Jonathan said. Each of these biomes, he expects that you'll get about 1 Fracturing Orb if you optimize for them. Whereas in Path of Exile 1, Fracturing Orbs, you need to build them up from 20 shards, and those shards are surprisingly rare in Path of Exile 1. There's something that you can get if you focus very heavily on the Harbinger mechanic that drops them, but it takes an enormous amount of farming of those Harbingers in order to get even 1. It feels like here we're going to be getting more of them than we do in POE 1. And here's one example of what a fractured item might look like. And something that Jonathan also confirmed, in Path of Exile 1, items can drop pre-fractured quite a bit. They're not currently going to be doing that, but it's something that they're considering in the future. Jonathan personally wasn't that much of a fan of it, but it's not ruled out as something that they'll add into the future. Now, there are going to be a number of changes to towers. These should be pretty popular. What they're doing essentially is making it so that towers are 3 times as good in terms of their impact on the Atlas, but something like 3 times as rare as they used to be. So you'll be spending less time running towers, and on top of that, when you do encounter a tower, it can have all of the sorts of other things that are now available in every map as well, whether that be new things like Rogue Exiles or Azmeri Wisps, or whether it be some of the things that already exist in the game that previously weren't available in towers, such as Rituals. There are also going to be some changes to essences. You can apply a Vaal Orb now to an essence, and this will be something akin to a Path of Exile 1 player's familiarity with the Remnant of Corruption. This will then allow you to upgrade an essence tier, potentially from normal to greater, potentially add another essence to a monster, or potentially even generate one of the new corruption-only essences. The Essence of Horror, which can only be used on gloves and boots, has a text 50% increased effect of socketed runes and soul cores, and there is the Essence of Insanity, which is exclusively for the belt slot. Now, it's worth saying that this is a complete non-starter if Grinding Games don't make any changes to the way that belts work. And that is, Ingenuity is so much better than every other belt that other belts may as well not exist. However, Essence of Insanity will upgrade a normal item to magic or a magic item to rare, so it functions like whichever is more favorable, a greater essence or a normal essence. And the guaranteed mod will be, on corruption, this item gains 2 enchantments. So it modifies the way Vaal Orbs work, guaranteeing a twice as interesting result. Essentially, guaranteeing double corruption. but this is going to come at the expense of an explicit modifier. And of course, with belts, if it's not ingenuity, it's not viable at the moment. So hopefully that ends up being changed. On top of that, there is the press kit that Grinding Gear Games put out. Inside that, there's a whole bunch of more information. I want to do deep dives into some of these later, but for now, let's go through quickly some of the news that we've got here. Firstly, the coming Calamity. This is a chase item. This is something that Grinding Gear Games have said. They know this is a chase item. This is going to be rare, and we don't know the exact details of how it's going to drop, but the sense that I got was that this is going to be a drop anywhere unique. That said, requiring level 84 means that it's something that can only drop from the very highest level content. Of course, there may be a level 18 version of this as well, which would be level requirement 78. In Path of Exile 2, gem level 18 requires level 78 to equip, gem level 19 requires 84, gem level 20 requires 90, and items that grant them, they end up working the same way. So this provides life, tri-elemental resistances, which is an important stat, and it's actually harder to get in Path of Exile 2 than it is in Path of Exile 1. But enemies in your presence have no elemental resistances. On top of that, you also gain 3 of the Herald skills as well. This item is going to be incredibly good, and it may end up being one of the top chase items in the entire game. Here's an example of what a screen looks like when a Fracturing Orb drops, and this is just one of the encounters against the post-corruption areas. So this is one of the cleansed maps. Fracturing Orb has dropped there. Next, we have the Amazon Ascendancy. Now, this is what all of the notables do on it, and I'll have to do a deep dive into this because there's just so much to go over in an entire Ascendancy, but here's the way that it all connects here. So this is the Amazon Ascendancy. Then we have one of the new Beyond bosses, Katash the Hate Shepherd. This is something that Path of Exile 1 players will recognize. This boss is involved in that game as well. This is what it will look like on your Atlas when you're encountering one of the corrupted areas, and it is also next to a cleansed area. So you've got some of both of that you can see there. The noticeable thing here is that the center one, this is the center of this area of the Atlas. If you make a beeline for this one has a different icon to indicate corruption. That's because it is the centerpiece of the corruption, and that's going to mean that it will have a monster like Katash the Hate Shepherd, that once you've killed it, then that will cleanse the rest of that area. There are a number of stats that have been provided for skills that are going to be available as things that you get from your Ascendancies. So as the Whispers asked, Corrupted Life Force both come from the Ritualist Ascendancy, and from the Amazon we have Elemental Infusion available. The Lich Ascendancy is something that has a really fascinating effect in it. This is the Crystalline Phylactery node. Here you'll be able to socket a non-unique basic jewel, and it will have 100% increased effect of the socketed jewel, and 50% more mana cost if you have no energy shield. So essentially, once you run out of energy shield, suddenly you are going to have to draw power from somewhere else, but this is going to allow you to, on your Ascendancy, get a double strength jewel. This is something that's only going to be worth it if you've got a really powerful setup. Also, you'll notice there's a number of things in this that are tied to energy shield, and also there's some options for life as well, which is something that will be interesting to see. Your life cannot change while you have energy shield. Eternal life is a really fascinating concept to have here, and that's something that will be interesting to see how it plays, especially in the future of Path of Exile 2. Depending on the exact way that they design things in the future, we already have 10% of damage taken bypasses energy shield from the 2-pointer that leads to it, but there's a whole bunch of interesting things that are just going on in this Ascendancy. So again, this requires a deep dive. This is just a quick look. And then we have the Ritualist Ascendancy, which again, this is just a really quick look. It will get its own video because it's definitely going to need one. One of the coolest things though, Unfurled Finger, +1 ring slot. And there is also another thing that is associated with that, 25% increased bonuses gained from equipped rings and amulets. So there's a lot of cool things that are going on inside this Ascendancy as well. But it's the Smith of Kitava that really transforms the way things get built the most. We have Smith's Masterwork. Firstly, this passive is free to allocate, but it has a tremendous drawback. You can only use a normal body armor. However, it then allows you to allocate for 1 passive point each, any number of these additional nodes to build your own masterwork, your own chess piece, that is then going to have a huge amount of additional defenses for your character on it. So these can vary from body armor grants regenerate 5% of your life per second. Body armor is going to grant 15% increased maximum life, 20% increased strength, plus 75 to a single resistance, elemental resistance. Armor gains unaffected by ignite, 5% maximum fire resistance. Lots and lots of things that you can use to defend your character in various ways. Remember, these are only going to cost 1 passive point each, but you do have that drawback that you can only use a normal body armor. No magic, no rare, no unique. Interesting build around setup there. You probably don't want to take this when you've only got 2 points worth to allocate on it. You probably don't want to take this until you're able to throw 4 points at least into it. And on top of that, there's also grant skill fire spell on hit, Heat of the Forge, which is something that we'll definitely have to see hard numbers on because it could be really interesting depending upon the amount of energy that it requires. There's a number of things that will also be familiar to Path of Exile 1 Chieftain Enjoyers. Modifiers to fire resistance also grant cold and lightning resistance at 50% of their value, and modifiers to maximum fire resist also grant maximum cold and lightning resistance. So Tesalio and Valaco from the Path of Exile 1 Chieftain. If you were to combine this with Flowing Metals, 5% maximum fire resistance, and Tantalum Alloys, 75% fire resistance, then you can build up a lot of the resistance your character needs from your Ascendancy, which then frees you up to take other things on your gear. That could be an interesting way to build, or alternately, maybe something else ends up being better. Now there's going to be an expansion of the rune system. We have the greater runes are being added. These are going to be something that you won't be able to get until endgame, but they're just simply better than the base versions of runes, and they also have some higher numbers. Runecrafting Games also mentioned they want to have affinity for runes so that you'll be able to control click them into your inventory more conveniently, but that this is not guaranteed to make 0.2.0. They want it in, but they're just not sure that it's going to be finished in time. On top of that, here's a little bit more on some of the changes that are taking place to Endgame. Notice that you'll now have 40 Atlas points instead of 30, and the Atlas tree is going to be substantially larger. So there'll be a few more options in order to customize Endgame, and in particular, the way that you get your early points will be a bit more interesting. And precursor tablets are getting their numbers changed because of all of the changes for towers. And finally, this is what the Tactician looks like. Again, this requires its own video, but for now, you can have a quick look at some of the details, and if you want to download this, again, it is available in that press kit. So that is a quick look at everything that is coming in 0.2.0 that's been announced. We do not have the patch notes yet though, and that is going to be the most decisive thing that's going to come up. I'm going to leave it there. May your Val Orbs have interesting results. Remember, you can use them on essences now, and I will see you around.